We were talking about the transition to film when we left. What was the attitude about television among the producers you were meeting out there in the beginning, I'm talking about? Did they look down upon it? Did they?
Yes, the major motion pictures, absolutely. We were a competitor, and they were concerned we'd wipe them out.
Uh-huh. So when you wanted to make a film show, who did you approach?
Well, Desi had his own studio, for example. MCA didn't care. They had their studios.
Mm-hmm.
And there was no problem getting a studio.
There wasn't.
The Ziv studios were there. Sam Goldwyn had his studios.
Republic, was that somebody else?
Republic had studios.
Right.
Yeah, that was somebody else.
So really the smaller studios were the only ones that were interested in getting involved at that point.
In the beginning.
Like Columbia set up Screen Gems early
Yes.
on, and that was to make television shows. So
Yes,
they were really
John Mitchell was running that.
So they were really the first, right, to get involved?
It's hard to say who was the first. They were coming out of the woodwork. We were coming from England. They were coming from everywhere. Canada.
What was the biggest difference in working with Hollywood than working in New York? As far as, I'm talking about the people, the
Well,
attitude.
Technically, they were far more skilled than New York.
Mm-hmm.
That was faster and better.
Mm-hmm.
The people involved, particularly in motion pictures, were slow.
Mm-hmm.
And they didn't understand you had to have it done. When the clock goes up, you're on. Forget about it. This little nuance didn't work, or the sound wasn't right, or whatever. You just had to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And we found out early that people watching television will tolerate imperfections if the entertainment is strong enough.
Mm-hmm. Did you find out anything about audience reaction to film as opposed to live? Was there any difference?
Nobody knew.
Really?
Nobody knew. Nobody cared. The entertainment was always the thing.
So it didn't matter whether it was a film show or a live show?
Didn't matter. As a matter of fact, when later, this is an example. When I did at Filmways, Shell's Wonderful World of Golf, they insisted on 35 millimeter. We found out we're chewing up golf courses, and it was hard to smuggle out the 35 millimeter print from the countries that didn't want us to get out without paying,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of other tiny problems. So we shot one in both 35 and 16, ran it side by side for the client. Couldn't tell the difference.
But clearly, there's a difference between an action show, an action film show where you have chases off into the sunset, and something that's set on a tiny little stage when all the action revolves in the kitchen of an apartment, like Marty. Did you find that there was any difference? Did people prefer action shows, chase shows, as opposed to talk shows?
No, what you're talking about is a technicality that interested them not in the least.
Right. It was really just the entertainment.
Keep your eye on focus on, do I like this or don't I? That's all.
Did Y&R ever approach the majors to try to get them involved?
Well, there was a time when Matty Fox was peddling a lot of things,
Mm-hmm.
and he was involved deeply with Columbia and some other studios, but we didn't really approach them. We were always asking, do you want to do a television show, but never pressing.
Right.
Didn't matter, we had other sources.
Right. Now, let's talk about packagers. The
Yeah.
two major packagers being, I guess, William Morris and MCA.
Right.
Explain, first of all, what a packager is and what it does.
Well, there were others too.
Okay.
I'd certainly put Screen Gems high up on the
Okay.
list there. And Desi.
Uh-huh.
Packager just supplies you with everything in a show. Everything, down to the print. And you have nothing to worry about, no problems except to read the script and approve it.
Mm-hmm.
We had and incidentally, while no one had a signed contract that I'm aware of ever in my career, we did have letters of agreement.
Right.
And one of mine gave me permission to supervise and add and edit the script of I Love Lucy. Well, that's got to be as stupid a thing you can have the right to do as I can think of.
Mm-hmm.
Why would I want to touch a successful show with my own tiny little editing?
Right. But you had that.
But I had the right.
But let's take MCA, for instance. As
Yeah.
a packager, they would give you the whole show, which you then would you would match with an advertiser, match with a network.
That's right.
And would go on the air.
Yes.
So they put together the writers,
Yeah.
the actors, the sets. They paid for everything.
Right.
Let's talk about MCA. Who were these people? Who was MCA?
Well, Sonny Warblin was the New York end.
Mm-hmm.
And why these fellows were so smart was that Herb Rosenthal was one we dealt with a lot in New York. He was so smart that he taught me the difference between 15% of gross and 17.65 of net. That's a classic agency commission. And you don't often get 17.65 on net unless you know what you're talking about. It was a complete new world for me, but he explained it so carefully. From that point on, we got the difference.
Wow.
It's just a mathematical thing is all it is.
Uh-huh.
Same amount of money.
Now, MCA was maybe the biggest packager at the time?
Yes.
And they
Slightly above William Morris.
had a lot of shows on the air.
Yeah.
Where did they come out of, these guys? MCA. What was their origins?
Oh, the top guy. Well, of course, Stein was an ophthalmologist, and
Lou Wasserman?
Lou Wasserman came from a carnival or a circus, or he was a local amusement park in Cleveland. I don't know where Sonny Werleman came from. Herb Rosenthal was a scholar for all practical purposes.
Didn't you tell me once that you were surprised when you heard Wasserman speak for the first
Yeah.
time? Why?
Terrible accent, common. Well, I'll tell you, I've had some dreadful experiences in that respect. First, remember, I was raised in the top blue chip companies at Young and Rubicam, Proctor and Gamble, where everybody talked like an Ivy League graduate. And then you hear these terrible table manners. Jack Warner and Sam Goldwyn had the worst table manners I have ever seen. Even I'm talking about on the farm or down in the Bowery Mission. These were slobs.
In what way?
Slobbed their food, talked with their mouth full of food. They had no manners. And I don't mean they were bad guys. The mama never told them how to eat.
I think somebody told me once they had a meal with Jack Warner, and he said afterward, announced very loudly, anybody got to go take a piss.
Yeah, well, he would do that.
Yeah.
And everybody did.
Fortunately, not in their dishes.
But in respect to MCA, I think I can tell you more about him when I tell you about my court experience.
But just one more thing.
Yeah.
Tell me about the glasses. I mean, just to give me give us a sense of perspective, the nightclub business, the old nightclub business.
When they started, they were booking bands. That was their business, period, out of Chicago. Mob ran all the places. Almost every nightclub is run by the mob to begin with, always has been. And they learned a lot from the mob. They literally were throwing stink bombs in some of these places to persuade them to get their products like glasses. Literally.
To get the nightclub to buy the glasses.
Buy the glasses. The nightclub would take the bands because they didn't have any source for them other than MCA and these particular bands. But they didn't have to buy any glass from them.
Now tell us about the suit and you tested.
All right. Well, I was subpoenaed. I was working for Filmways, president of Filmways. And I was subpoenaed by one of the assistant district attorney or United States attorneys. And he said, meet me at a saloon in the 8th Avenue or 9th Avenue. I said, where? And he said, well, I don't want anybody to be seen by anybody. So I thought, what the hell? I'd just soon meet him at 21, but if that's what he wants, I'll do it. In a seedy saloon. He said, we're building a case against MCA for a monopoly. By monopoly, I mean they were trying to cut everybody out. If they handled a director and they handled a producer, a writer, and a star, they would use only their own clients. And anybody who tried to break that up was having very much difficulty. I had made some slight attempt to act as a New York representative for some talent with Bob Hope's agent and some other people like that, Bing Crosby's agent, and there was no way we could do it. MCA was too big. We couldn't get all the ingredients together. I must say that was not a big, important effort, but it existed. We did try slightly. So he wanted to hear that, but he also heard they tried to bribe me. Now, I'm not sure where he heard that. But I said, yes, they did. And the way it happened was this. I had to replace We the People. I was the client representative for golf, period. Nobody else was involved in this, so it was my job. And I went out to California with the head of advertising for Gulf, Win Dermody, and the account executive from Y&R. And we met with the MCA guys. As a matter of fact, they invited Joan Crawford. As a matter of fact, they asked me if I wanted Joan Crawford. I said, not particularly.
Oh, God.
And we were always having that trouble in California. And but they invited her for dinner. She sat next to me, and we talked. I knew she'd gone to Stevens College, and we had some small talk stuff. And they showed us the films they were making with stars like Joan Crawford. That's why she was there. For Chevron, which had a West Coast distribution, and Gulf had all the rest of the country. Perfect match. Mm-hmm. When you're buying a full network, you got two companies that don't conflict, and they're perfectly matched. And MCA was very anxious to get Gulf, very anxious. But we thought it was, we all talked about it, the client and my account executive and me. And we said, well, it's fine. There's no problem with an anthology, and they have good stars, and the price is right. So we were going to do it. I don't know what, truly don't know what made them do this. We went back to New York. We arranged for the Gulf top management to hear the proposal and listen to the names of the stars and everything. It was a set deal. Well, I went out there, and in the morning of the presentation, I was staying in a hotel in downtown Pittsburgh. I got a telegram. What it said was, if you are successful, when you come back, there will be a something Foote something diesel boat anchored in your name in the 5 Mile River in Norwalk. I look at the signature. It's a friend of mine. We like cars together. We're socializing together. He knows that he's not going to get anywhere with that stuff. So I couldn't figure out why. Now, here's a dilemma I have. This is what I told the grand jury. I said, I'm supposed to be an honest, upright businessman, and suddenly I'm getting a telegram like this. If I tell the president of my company, Sig Larman, that I got this telegram, he'd think I was susceptible. They wouldn't have sent it to me if I weren't going to take it. And I had a hell dilemma. If I told the Gulf company that, they would be shocked. So I threw it away. I went to the meeting. I knew somebody on the board or somebody would always try to oppose everything. So one guy did. He said, I don't think we can make this commitment for 26 episodes. I said, you're right. Killed the deal. Killed it cold. And everybody's looking at me, the advertising director, the agency supervisor. What was I doing? I could have argued with the guy on majority who said, oh, let's try it. We can always renew it or something. I had to start all over again.
Did you eventually buy a show from them?
No. Well, wait a minute. Excuse me. That was not the point. I would have bought a show from them if they get off my back.
But
We bought The Life of Riley with Bill Bendix. I believe that was their client. With Irving Brecker writing, it made a big difference. But Irving Brecker was a great writer, and Bill Bendix, a strong personality, turned out fine.
Right.
So I explained to him that I didn't know any other way to handle that.
Did you ever say to your friend, why did you do this?
Oh yeah. Oh, indeed, I did. Later, much later.
Right.
And he said it was just a joke. I said, a joke? But by the way, they found that telegram. The United States government can find anything. I didn't know what day it was. I didn't know what month it was. I knew approximately when it was. And I knew what hotel I was staying in. They found the telegram.
Wow. And eventually MCA lost that. They were successful in suing MCA, weren't they?
Oh, no, MCA copped a plea by that time.
They did?
Yeah. They would have won, yeah.
But that was sort of typical business practice by MCA, you know?
Not as far as I knew, but I certainly knew after that.
Right. What were some of the other ways that you talk about the...
Well, they asked me, for example, if Kentner was taking money, the grand jury.
Right.
How do I know? I said, I don't think so. But what I think they will get to Kentner with is a good-looking girl.
Right. Which they would do, right?
Which they would do, indeed.
What would they do?
Well, Howard Morgans, who is above all this stuff, told me, he said, I was invited out with MCA, and some attractive, intelligent girl was talking to me, and she stayed with me, and he said she was paying more attention to what I was saying than my wife ever did, even when we were courting. That's how naive he was.
Now, didn't Peter Lavasi, LeVathy's also was offered women?
Oh, no, well, Peter LeVathy's became head of 20th Century Fox production.
Right.
First thing the guy came who was a casting director said, Pete, what do you prefer, blondes, redheads, dark? And Peter said, what are you talking about? He said, well, we got everything here. They all want to be in the movies.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Peter, of course, was the last one in the world that would like anything like that.
Now, paying, I've heard of payoffs to heads of TV,
Yeah.
without using names, to heads of TV networks, and packagers would pay them. This was not uncommon, correct?
Well, I wrote I wrote a lot of articles. I had the Eye and the Ear column for Ad Age, and I also wrote the TV viewpoints with initials JB on them for Television Age.
Mm-hmm.
And I addressed this in one of them.
Uh-huh.
And I talked about the white Cadillac on the local level, where you always go out and meet some local manager. He's driving a white Cadillac.
Right.
Everybody knew he got the white Cadillac from buying certain programs.
Right.
There was a lot of it going on.
Without using names, somebody else in the ad business with a house full of furniture?
Yeah,
How did
one of the
that
top men.
How did that happen?
Stein had a company in 57th Street off Park Avenue, close to Park Avenue, which was called the Incurable Collector. No furniture in MCA was not an antique, by the way, which was very smart. Their furniture never depreciated, it appreciated.
Mm-hmm.
And they were well-chosen antiques.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they used the same practice by lending rare antiques to the homes or offices of some of the top management.
And
They never took it back.
But encouraging them to
Encouraging them.
MCA programs.
On Friday, you're going to buy it.
Right.
It wasn't subtle.
Now, tell me the wonderful your trip to California, and tell me the Desi story.
Oh, well, Desi was he's such a charming rogue. You can't hold anything against him. But I was with a guy who was Catholic. He knew he was in perfect grace. He knew if he did anything wrong, his wife would hit him in the head with a rolling pin as soon as he got home. No questions asked. He knew all that. I said, well, okay, John. This is John Brady. He represented General Foods and a lot of this stuff at that point. I said, when you're around MCA or Desi or anybody else, don't mention girls. And there were two things happened. We'll get rid of the MCA one first. We were dealing with Jennings Lang, or one of the top guys out there, and we were talking about how much it would cost us for overhead for their studio if we were making a show of our own, all that stuff. He's very Harvard Business School type. And suddenly, John pokes me. He says, "Look at the hair on that receptionist," and she had a white streak in it. We'd never seen that before. And I said, "John," and didn't get it out of my mouth. And Jennings Lang said, "Having trouble getting girls, fellows?" But Desi was better. The Whiting girls were the summer replacement for Lucy. Now, Lucy was very smart. First, she didn't want to work 52 weeks out of the week. She needed a rest, and she needed it bad, and she knew she couldn't get scripts if she had worked a full 52. So she picked somebody might be her substitute, which is Barbara Whiting and Maggie Whiting. And so we had to show those Whiting girls. All John meant, or I meant, when we said we had to say hello to the girls, is we've seen a show they had just done in the simulcast, and we wanted to go back and congratulate them and say "good show, girls" or something like that. But the minute you say "girls" to Desi, flags go up. So after we congratulated Whiting girls, we went to Desi's luau, which he owned in downtown Beverly Hills, and he had the big chair which he sat in, which was his chair, and everybody stopped to talk. And after a while, he said, "Rod, come to the John with me." Well, I didn't know what was going to happen, but it's Desi. So I went with Desi to the John. We got in there. He said, "I got two great girls for you and John." He said, "I haven't tried them yet, but they're very highly recommended from Las Vegas." And I'm thinking, oh, come on, Desi, what am I going to do now? I didn't want to offend him. He was being kind and generous, he thought. Big gift. I said, "Desi, I don't know how to tell you this. It embarrasses me." I said, "John and I are both married to younger women, and we come out here for the rest." He said, "Oh, I understand. I'll take both of them. Don't worry about it." That's typical Desi.
Now, you said that clients like to come out to California. Some
Oh,
clients
yeah.
liked for that reason, right, to go out there.
Well, I didn't find that necessary. They just like to get away from the office, basically.
Right.
And we'd have a nice time. We'd be by the pool at the Bel Air, making people come to us.
Right.
Mind you, everybody wanted to sell a show to General Foods, would have crawled on his belly across the country, loaded with pilots and whatever he had to have. So there was no question that we had to go to California.
So you would go to California, and what would you do? Explain
Well,
those trips to California.
well, first place, there'd always be a breakfast meeting,
Mhm.
usually at the Bel Air, and sometimes the Polo Room. Then we would, that would be a business meeting with either the agency contact out there, like our contacts, Walter Bunker or Bob Hussey, whatever.
Mhm.
Then we go back to the hotel, and we'd have set up meetings long before we came with John Mitchell, the MCA, maybe Desi, and certainly William Morris.
What was the point of these meetings?
Talk about coming shows, so we'd have a head start. If something appealed to us, we would concentrate on that to replace something that was usually something was always dying.
And so they would say, we have this show or that show.
They'd give us everything in development
Right.
before the pilot was made.
Mhm.
And then we could either option it or we could pay for the pilot if we were that interested. We were never that interested,
Right.
but that's a possibility.
Right. And then these meetings would go on throughout the day?
Yes, and well, there'd be a luncheon meeting. Usually, a luncheon meeting was somebody we had a special interest in seeing out there, maybe an existing show producer or whatever. And we also had a strategy. We first place, we never let these people pick up a tab. That was the first rule. So we invited them to come to the Bel Air. And we sat in our bathing suits by the pool, and MCA guys came in their black suits. They were very uncomfortable because it was hot out there. So we had a negotiating advantage to start out with.
Now, didn't you tell me that it was the General Foods guy who liked to go and drink like crazy on the trip?
Yeah, he's dead now, Ed Abel.
Yeah.
He drank a quart of Canadian every day.
And he would like to go on these trips because he can get away, right? This was
Yeah,
his sort of
right,
the way he would
right.
get away.
This is his playpen.
Right. Now, you just said before about you told him never to pick up a tab.
Yeah.
This relates to something else which I want to get into, which was dealing with the mob guys.
Yeah.
How did that work?
Well, I was told this both by MCA agents and William Morris agents. They were told never to let a gangster pick up a tab or they'd be beholden to him.
Mm-hmm.
If it started out with just whiskey, pretty soon they'd be getting a car or whatever fell off the truck,
Right.
new television set, something like that. Then they were had. By that time, they were marked.
But also, didn't your people have to know the same thing? Sometimes you would come in contact with mob people?
No, we didn't necessarily. Well, we happened to hire Monty Prosser for Packard, Holiday Hotel, and he was at the Copacabana. He did all the shows at the Copacabana, but I don't think there was a relationship. He just got stuck with the mob stigma because he did that.
Now, tell me, the one guy who's really well connected in CBS to the mob, tell me about Keith Brazell.
Well, there's no question about what he was. First place, Keith Brazell got into bad trouble after he got out of show business. He wanted somebody taken out, and he reports this himself about having. And he also had big trouble later with Jim Aubrey. They were very close, and I can't figure out. It's not Jim Aubrey. The Jim Aubrey I know went to Princeton, graduated magna cum laude. He was a quarterback on the team. His father was a distinguished advertising man, and I don't know what the relation was with Keith Brazell.
Well, but you have a situation now with Marv Albert.
Yeah.
Where this is a distinguished person who, in the bedroom, has.
Well, he's not distinguished the way Jim Aubrey was.
But,
And that's sex. Sex crosses all boundaries, and sometimes it's crazy.
But he liked his S&M sex. Wasn't that the story about Jim Aubrey?
No, Jim Aubrey didn't need any pride. He married a wonderful actress, Phyllis Thaxter.
Oh, but now Jim Aubrey was the head of CBS. Keith Brazell was an actor who had
Some shows, but he had some shows too. He had some shows.
And there was a little bit of a mystery why all of a sudden Jim Aubrey bought
3 shows.
3 shows from Keith
Yeah.
Brazell.
Yeah.
And that's that.
I don't think that was a bribe. What I think was Jim wanted to run his own shows,
Uh-huh.
and Keith was an instrument where he could do that.
Tell me about the dinner you had at Keith
Oh.
Brazil's nightclub.
Well, first place, Gene and I had a silver cloud Rolls in those days.
Mhm.
I usually wore the chauffeur's cap when I drove. And Jim Aubrey was married to Phyllis Thaxter. And Phyllis Thaxter was a lady who wasn't sure she wanted to go to the opening of Keith Brazil's nightclub. So she and Gene got along fine, and we were good. Well, I said, what the hell, we'll go out in the Rolls, it can't be terrible. And all the top management of CBS under Jim, all of them, sales, Oscar Katz, I think, was there, Bill Hyland, everybody who was important. Oh, Al McCleary and his wife were there. We're doing shows there. And we came in. It was a nightclub. It wasn't any special thing. And we noticed that the table parallel to ours had some very strange-looking people. And the first one to come up was Joe Profaci, who ran the Brooklyn mob. And he was the godfather literally the godfather to Keith Brazil. Keith Brazil was married to one of the DeMarco sisters. And Joe Profaci knew who Jim Aubrey was. And he shook hands with him. He knew he was important to his godson. When he looked at me, he couldn't figure me out, which often happens, by the way. Am I an FBI man? Am I with the cops? Am I Secret Service? Or what am I? And he frisked me. He patted me down. He shook hands. Oh, my boy, I'm so glad to see you. Literally like that. Well, he looked like an illiterate, which he was, and moth-eaten Italian guy. Didn't make it in life. But he made it all right. And we got over that, and then he said, here are my boys at the next table. They all just got out of the Appalachian racket. They all were caught. They climbing over fences, running over fields, and the cops are surrounding them, chasing them down. They were having a big mob meeting, and somebody blew the whistle, and the cops were all there and captured them all, put them in a pokey. Then after a while, their lawyers got them out, and they came to celebrate this night. In the back are the mistresses in one corner and the wives in the other. And the way these guys paid off Keith Brazil, or wished him luck, they put $100 to $1,000 bills under their plate. That was the custom, to help the kid along.
Mhm.
Of course, it was tax-free.
Right.
And
What happened to the place?
well, there was one interesting thing, too. When we came out, the Rolls wouldn't start, which is not uncommon. And one of these guys was in the parking lot, which is probably for protection, walked right over, and the car went in 5 minutes. Just like that, he knew what to touch, the buttons to touch.
Mm-hmm.
Now, then later, we drove back to New York, and I think it was 3 days later, the Jersey mob blew it up because Profaci was trying to intrude on their territory for a floating crap game for the defense workers in
So
that
it was
area.
really just a front for a floating.
Just a
platform.
front. But it was a good show. I must say, Keith Brazil and the DeMarco sister he was married to put on a great entertainment.
And you had a lot of high CBS people there.
All of them.
Yeah,
Jim asked them all to come. They came.
right.